We're at the Collision here in Toronto, and as usual, the Collision is a melting pot of startups looking for solutions of problems which are unsolved so far. Um, Actually, UserWay is dealing with accessibility, and the question I was asking is. Why is accessibility for disabled people still an issue as we're talking about user experience, seamless access to everything we have in life? Why is that still an issue?
That's a good question, and it's a question that we really struggle with every day because UserWay is here also to help increase and improve the awareness around digital accessibility. So part of the reason I think is because technologies change and evolve so fast, but then the rate of adoption of certain standards and the remediation technologies like what UserWay provides is really a matter of awareness. So you may think about, oh, let's take a look at this new technology because it's sexy, because it could reduce our turnaround times, or it can create an improved user experience. And the rate of adoption of new technologies, I think, is just faster than the rate of adoption of the remediations. And so there is a gap in those particular things, and UserWay is just trying to increase awareness around a discussion of accessibility and remediation.
And how did it come that you are dealing with that? As I've learned, you founded a lot of companies before. You're that what we call a serial entrepreneur, so to speak. What was the reason you came up to with this problem?
So a previous company of mine that was based in Israel actually needed to comply with accessibility regulations. And this was back in 2015, 2016. I was scanning the market looking for an accessibility solution that would be compelling from a technological point of view, but also reasonable from a pricing perspective. And there wasn't anything in the market that was suitable for startups. It was more enterprise level tickets, 50, 100K. And obviously that wasn't going to fly for a small startup that I was managing at the time. So I took our team of developers and I said, okay, so here's a two-pager about what I expect the product to do. And within 60 days, we built a prototype. We put it out there for the world to use for free. It was a completely free solution. And then I kind of ignored it and I went on to build another company. So for the 2 years following that, I was kind of ignoring that pet project of mine, but it ended up getting more exposure. It became viral and it started being used by companies like Coca-Cola and Disney and FedEx. And then it got to the point where I realized there's potential for a business here. And there's a lot more that I can do with accessibility and not just some basic automation. And so that's basically the story of how UserWay came up. It was born out of necessity, out of regulation. And regulation, in fact, is what's giving birth to this greater industry of digital accessibility that now covers not only websites, but PDFs, documents, and soon web apps. Web apps don't fall under regulation today, but we do expect that to change in the coming years. Regulation today is something that exists in several areas. So we do have it in Israel, we do have it in the US with the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. In Europe, it's the EAA, European Accessibility Act, that is only applicable to organizations working with governmental institutions. So if you have a government contractor, if you're working with a municipality, you're required to be accessible. That's going to change in June 28th of 2025. So we have 2 years, and we think that in the coming year and a half to 2 years, more companies in Europe are going to start waking up to understanding what they need to do. In most cases, accessibility is not something that you handle overnight. Within enterprises and organizations, sometimes you need to pitch it internally. You need to get your internal evangelists, your internal stakeholders to prioritize that as an internal project. So we think this is a good time to start increasing awareness also in the European market.
You mentioned regulation. The regulation differentiates from country to country usually, and you, as UserWay, are globally active. You named very big clients. So you have to provide, or you want to provide globally working solutions. So how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're actually lucky that in our space, the regulations, whether they're in the Europe, the US, or in Asia, or in South America, they all fall back on what's called the WCAG, WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And those are standards for digital accessibility that are created by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. It's the same organization of international engineers. It's a nonprofit. It's the same organization that creates the security standards, the HTML standards, now also the accessibility standards. So if you look at the accessibility regulations in the US, in Israel, in Europe, they all refer to the WCAG, or specifically in Europe, EN 301549, which is a sister of the WCAG. It's a
You're very familiar with the regulation, I see.
I am, yeah.
You mentioned the potential of your solution. Could you measure this? Could you give us an impression how big this potential is for your solution?
So today UserWay is installed on over 1 million sites. It's actually far greater than that. We do have specific numbers, but we just mentioned, we basically stopped counting it at 1 million, so that's kind of the marketing number that we use, but we're on much more than 1 million websites with many leading brands, SMBs as well. And the potential really is enormous. We see this as a blue ocean with more than 200 million active websites globally today, and more than 200,000 new websites being published every single day. We still haven't been able to close that gap. We may be onboarding hundreds or thousands of sites per day, but it's still far from the 200K sites being born every day. And so our work really is on increasing awareness, kind of educating the market and why it's important. We did a piece with Forbes about a year ago on the economic impact of inaccessibility, and that companies lose during the Black Friday weekends and the period between Thanksgiving and Christmas, which is like the crazy shopping period. Companies are losing billions of dollars on aggregate by not having an accessible experience for their end users. Today, 26% of the US population and about 1 billion people globally live with one form of disability or other. And it's not your, typical disabilities that you may be familiar with, like being blind or deaf or motor impairment, but it could be a learning disability, it could be a cognitive disability, and can also be an invisible disability that you might not even be aware that someone else has, but it's something that it's a challenge that they're living with. And it could affect the way they consume digital content, the way they interact with a website, the way they fill a form, or check out a shopping cart on an e-commerce or Shopify store. So again, it really goes back to companies understanding that it's not only the right thing to do from a moral point of view, but it's also the right thing to do from a bottom line perspective. We've done research and case studies with various leading organizations, such as the one that we published recently with Natural Intelligence around the economic, the interaction impact of an improved UI from having an accessible website. And they're seeing upwards of 3% on earnings per visit, earnings per click, more time on site, a reduced bounce rate, because they're now providing an accessible experience. So the impact on the bottom line is something that cannot be ignored by businesses today.
You brought a very brilliant example of what's in it for the American market, but you are going to enhance your activities in Europe. You're already working from Warsaw, so you're already in Europe, but you're going to improve what you're doing here, or just to make more of this. What makes the difference between the US and Europe?
So, unlike what we've seen over the past 5 to 7 years with GDPR, where Europe was really leading the privacy and data privacy regulation, and then America caught up with that, we're seeing the exact opposite here. We're seeing America for the past 10, 15 years started giving more attention to digital accessibility. European regulation with the EAA As I mentioned earlier, they are adopting this initially for governmental institutions and businesses working with governmental institutions. But they're learning from the US. The US really has kind of an inherent initiative for inclusivity and accessibility that really comes from over 31 years of the ADA, that federal law, being in place. But it doesn't matter basically who's the leader and who's the follower, as long as everyone finally closes the gap. And we think that Europe is on the right track. We're tracking the different EU countries right now as to who is adopting the EAA just the way it is, like a copy paste, and who's actually modifying it and issuing new modifications to the base EAA law. And so we're looking at every European market. About 75% of the EU countries have already just adopted it. A few countries remain as they're evaluating the laws internally and understanding the business impact for their on the domestic level. But I think that within the next couple of years, most of the Western world really is going to be aligned on accessibility regulations.
So you would say that the European market is the more attractive one because there's more potential in it?
So, to be honest, right now it's just in its infancy. And we do see that from an accessibility and remediation perspective, the European, once it's enacted and once it's enforced, we do feel that European businesses are going to follow suit, maybe more proactively than what we've seen US businesses do. And that's just based on the history with what GDPR showed. So we're optimistic that European businesses are going to comply hopefully faster. And American businesses, today 97.8% of websites are still non-compliant. And that's with regulation, and that's with lawsuits happening. And there are thousands of lawsuits this past year. Small businesses, large enterprises, no one is immune. If you have an inaccessible website and there's a blind person trying to access your website and they're not able to, then they're going to make a point, and you may be exposed to some legal risk around that. But the European countries, we believe, are also going to kind of float this up to businesses in a way that shines the spotlight on the importance of this. And the US is interesting to follow and to see how they're doing that, but we believe Europe is going to take a different approach.
As we are talking about accessibility over the last minutes, it seems to be a bit different from the topics that's dealt with here over the last days at the coalition. Mm-hmm. Because the ever dominating topic is AI, at least at the first sight. What do you say? What does accessibility, what does your solution has to do with AI?
That's a good question.
You have something in the backhand.
Right. So UserWay solutions basically split into two schools. The first is the automated solutions, where they're plug and play, and they remediate just with full automation. That automation includes AI to it. And then the second group of services are UserWay's professional services that support some of the automated solutions. And these include empathy labs, audits, part of UserWay University, training for developers, designers, and other stakeholders within the organization. So if you look at the productized technologies that UserWay has, which is our AI-powered accessibility widget, our Fix My Code solution for developers who can just dump their code in and our AI will fix it. Our AI models are trained on the WCAG and the remediations of over 1 million websites that run UserWay-powered remediations. So AI is something that we try to build in most of our products because the value that it brings and the intelligence it provides has been game-changing for us. So a simple example would be computer vision. So people who are blind need to hear the description of what an image includes. And so our computer vision will analyze an image, add a description, and make that change the accessibility layer in the HTML and the DOM of the website. And again, with the Fix My Code tool for developers, if you go to fixmycode.ai, you'll be able to experience that. It's open, no registration required. Any developer can go in there, either dump their code in and within seconds get remediated code based on WCAG 2.1 AA, or even ask it with natural language, provide me the code for an accessible pop-up or an accessible navigation menu in React or Angular or pure HTML, JS. And that uses generative AI based on large language models. And what you're right, a lot of the topics and the discussions here and the talks on stage really have to do with the revolution of AI, especially over the past year. And UserWay was working with AI for the past 6-7 years before it even became a sexy buzzword. So we've been in AI for quite a bit, and we're going to continue doubling down on what AI can bring to accessibility.
When you observe the discussions we have here at the coalition, what's your impression? Is the social impact you are going for, is it sometimes overseen over the discussions of using AI?
Can you rephrase the question, please?
We're talking here a lot of about artificial intelligence and the potential which is in it. However, you as a company are following this social impact approach. So I wonder whether the social impact you follow or you go for, that is a bit overseen or forgotten. Let me put it like this in this discussion.
That's a good question. We are seeing a lot of green tech, maybe not enough, but social impact is something that I think most of the companies are trying to find. Okay, so we have a cool product, then how does it impact our environment, or how does it impact our community? And so sometimes they're trying to kind of find how to shoehorn that into their products, or to adjust their marketing message to address the social impact aspects as well. But it is definitely like the topic of the day. A lot of companies are trying to figure out, can we adjust, modify, or tweak our things to make more social impact? And then there are companies that are born out of that, and it's part of their inherent DNA. And we're just happy that we're seeing more of that and more awareness of that. Some of the topics that people are discussing here on stage have to do, again, with environmental impact, social impact. And with UserWay specifically, our product actually changes people's lives. If you look at what happened during COVID, during the lockdowns, people with disabilities who were in lockdown and who had to rely on the internet for communication, for purchasing food, medications, for their connection to the outside world, who can't use a mouse, who maybe aren't able to see that button or interact with computers the way other people do. They were basically imprisoned in their own house, stuck with inaccessible experiences. So the importance cannot be understated with how UserWay over the past few years has improved the lives of millions of people, and is continuing to do so. And we're optimistic that more companies are adopting an approach that's social impact first, and we think that we're going to see more of that.
So what is your vision for UserWay?
So we see UserWay as the infrastructure for accessibility on the internet. And today, with over 1 million websites using UserWay, more and more companies are approaching us for other aspects, for design audits, for VPATs, for audits, for many ancillary services. And as UserWay is automating more of these, our vision is to have a part of the accessibility solution for every website in the world. And we want to impact it one way or another, and it doesn't necessarily mean having the UserWay accessibility widget on the site. It could mean, that they're using some of our custom site remediations, which we call CSRs, or they engage with us in other ways. But basically, impacting every website, every digital asset with some piece of the UserWay technology stack, and continuing to impact the world that way.
So let's try to put it in a short way. When we repeat our talk in, for instance, 10 years, how would you describe UserWay then?
Continuing to change the lives of millions of people. And I think that what is going to change most significantly between now and then is the way that digital content is created. We're going to see much more digital content created with automation and AI, and building UserWay into the stack or into the AI training models, so those assets can be created from day one in an accessible way without having to remediate them post factum, and UserWay to be in that part of the life cycle or product life cycle or content life cycle. I think that's where we're going to be.
Good luck for that. I'm looking forward to it, and thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to see you in Germany.
It was a real pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you in Germany too. Thank you.